Edge of the North.
Mike Tirico last night, the final game of the 2025 regular season was really great. We'll get to our team in a moment because there was a lot over the weekend, even before they beat the Eagles last evening. But just a minute or so on one of the real games of Week 18, and there weren't many during Week 18. The two Saturday games, the Atlanta-New Orleans game early, some seeding, games in the 4 o'clock window, and then the game last night. But that back and forth in the fourth quarter between Lamar Jackson and Aaron Rodgers, that's classic NFL regular season ender. What a finish in Pittsburgh last night. If you did not stay up to watch, that was vintage Aaron Rodgers against, really, based on his season this year, a resuscitated Lamar Jackson. And you throw in to that drama last night, 2 missed kicks, not 1, but 2. Boswell missed an extra point that set up the dramatic end of Tyler Loop's missed 44-yard field goal to lose the game. That was win or lose on that kick versus lose or tie and force overtime, because Boswell had missed the extra point after Aaron Rodgers had thrown another go-ahead fourth quarter touchdown pass. Amazing drama last night. The NFL always delivers the best in, what do they call it, reality TV. What a football game last night. Good morning. 272 regular season games. We are done. God, it flies by. It really does. And I know that people are like, oh, the games yesterday, and please don't add an 18th game. Oh, I'm going to miss it so much. Back in the saddle here after the first of the year. By the way, Happy New Year to everybody after a few days off last week. Max is with me. Ben is going to join us on the show today. Ben had some reporting over the weekend on the Cliff Kingsbury situation. If you don't know what I am referring to, there was a report from Diana Rossini at The Athletic over the weekend that Washington has had conversations about moving on from Kingsbury, even if he doesn't get a head coaching job. Diana's report also mentioned, a disconnect between Adam Peters and Cliff Kingsbury, according to some people in the building. Ben had some follow-up reporting on that initial story, so we'll get to Ben on his information when he joins us at noon. I, too, have a few thoughts on that report, including what I was told, and we will get to that here in the first hour of the show. We'll get to the game yesterday as well, and we will do our best to recap a game in which Washington won 24-17 to cost themselves 2 draft slots, going from number 5 overall, because earlier in the day, Cleveland and the Giants both won. So if they had lost to the Eagles, they'd be number 5 in the late April draft first round. But because they won the game, they'll stay at 7 overall. Meantime, the Eagles had a chance to grab the 2 seed by winning the game because the Lions were beating the Bears. But they chose rest and health over potentially 2 or more home games in the playoffs. Speaking of the playoffs, the field and the schedule both are set. That happened last night, and of course, the last team in was Pittsburgh. I know many of you are so into our team and don't watch or follow as much of the rest of the league. I've noticed that certainly over the years. And that's fine. I'm not knocking it. For me, football is the best because it just is a phenomenal reality show where most of the games matter. And now that we've reached the most important part of the season, the playoffs, the one and done nature of it is just, for me, as a sports fan, as a football fan, as an NFL fan, I just would never deprive myself of this time of year and in the games that matter. I love the sport so much. that I get wrapped up into what we're doing, and a lot of it is because of what I do here on this show. But I know many of you are dialed into one thing and one thing only, and that's all you want to hear about today. And we will talk a lot about our team today, but I love the NFL playoffs, even when my team is out of it. You know, maybe it's because my team for the last 34 years has been out of it so often. You know, it's possible, and I tried to think about this before the show started because I wanted to talk about just the nature of, can you get into the NFL playoffs when your team's not in it? I can. I have no problem getting into it at all. I love it. It's the best. You know, I think this upcoming weekend and the weekend that follows it are two of the best 3, 4, 5 weekends of the year in sports. But I was thinking about how I felt in, say, the mid-'90s after a couple of years of Washington, not a couple of years, but those first few years when Washington wasn't good and the Redskins weren't in the playoffs after basically being a playoff team every year for a decade plus, and how I felt. I probably felt a little bit, you know, like I don't care that much. You know, we had a disappointing season. I'm used to watching my team in the playoffs. But for the last, 20, 25, years where we were far removed from the glory days, I mean, it matters to me that my team isn't in it. It does. But again, I don't deprive myself of the best time of year in this sport because the Skins aren't in it. I much prefer years like last year. I do. I much prefer years like last year. And I'm excited about what, the offseason will bring us. There's going to be a lot to the offseason for sure. But man, I am excited about the upcoming NFL playoffs. It's one of, I think, the most unpredictable postseason fields we have seen in years. You know, this upcoming wild card weekend with Seattle and Denver as the 1 seeds sitting out. We get the Rams at Carolina. The Rams, as a 10-point favorite a month ago, lost in Charlotte outright. The Rams are 10-point favorites again at Carolina. That's nuts. That's an unbelievable point spread. It is the second highest road playoff favorite in NFL history, or at least in the Super Bowl era. The highest, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2020 at FedEx against the Washington football team, right? That was the first year of WFT with Taylor Heineke at quarterback and Tom Brady for the Buccaneers. But the Rams, 10-point favorites at the Panthers to kick it off Saturday afternoon at 4:30. And then Saturday night, we get a rematch of that insane Packers-Bears game from a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday night. Green Bay is a short favorite on the road in Soldier Field. I mean, you start with 2 road favorites wild card weekend. How about Bills at Jags? Another road favorite. The Bills are favored over a Jags team that's won 8 games in a row and is the hottest team in the NFL. And then we get 49ers Eagles. The Eagles could have, with a win, had they beaten Washington yesterday, not only pushed us up to the 5 spot in the draft, but they would have hosted a game against Green Bay, who's kind of limping into the postseason. Instead, they'll get the 49ers next Sunday at 4:30. Man, did Seattle's defense do a number on San Francisco. I've talked so much this year about the defensive resurgence in the NFL. My God, the Seattle defense against that offense that had averaged 42 points a game over the last 3. They couldn't make a yard. That was scary for the rest of the NFC, knowing that Seattle has home field advantage and they've got that defense. And then Sunday night, we get the Patriots, who now that the regular season is complete, 14-3 overall, and they beat 1 team with a winning record. Of their 14 games this season, 1 team they beat with a winning record, and that was Buffalo early in the season. They'll face the Chargers on Sunday night, and then we get the team that I and Max, the two of us were on this 2 months ago, that Houston might be the best team in the AFC. Now, what's interesting about Houston here recently, that defense, I think, along with Seattle, the two best defenses in the league, although Philadelphia fully healthy is probably right there heading into the postseason. But Houston, in the last couple of games, they've given up yards to the Raiders in points. Now, they did not, have a lot to play for yesterday, and they didn't play a lot of their starters for the entire game, but their starters played, for enough of the game. And Riley Leonard and the Colts put up 30. So we'll see. I mean, I think Stroud has played big in big games when you look at him in the postseason the last few years. But that game at Pittsburgh Monday night, do you know that it's been 23 straight home Monday night wins for Pittsburgh in the regular season? And they get a Monday night playoff game at home. And it's another road favorite on Wild Card Weekend. That is unbelievable that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the 6 games right now, could change, are road favorites. Crazy NFL postseason that we are embarking on, and I can't wait for it. I love talking about games more than names, typically, but there was a lot of naming of, certainly inside the building sources, some saying that Cliff Kingsbury and Adam Peters have a disconnect. So I will get to that. I will get to yesterday's game, but I want to start with this from Daniel P. Daniel P. writes, "Fire Quinn now. They barely beat a team playing backups. This win was the most embarrassing game of the season. The Eagles played third stringers, and we barely won the game. Are you kidding me?" This is where I wonder what you guys are watching. Because Daniel P. wasn't the only one. I got this from Tyler. Tyler writes, "Pathetic way to end the season, Kevin. Lost draft position by barely beating a team not trying to win with backups and third stringers." Hey, Daniel P., Tyler, I'm sorry. What string is Josh Johnson? What are you guys talking about? We didn't play starters. I mean, God, this is where it's like, I don't know what to say. Yes, I get it. Philadelphia sat most of their starters. They did play some of their starters, like Devontae Smith to get, another catch and more yards early in the game. And Jordan Davis played some, and Jomo played some, and Brandon Graham was out there. He hasn't been a starter necessarily. They had some starters out there. But yes, it was mostly backups, not third stringers necessarily, mostly backups, although there were some deep on the depth chart players. By the way, I'll remind you that they love Tanner McKee. Like, there are people in Philadelphia that have said over the last 7-8 months, Tanner McKee might be a better option at quarterback, especially as a passer of the football. I was not impressed with him yesterday. But, I mean, what are you guys talking about? Seriously. Josh Johnson is our third-string quarterback. He's 39 years old. I mean, once again, there were dudes on the field where I'm like, what's number 79's name again? Oh, it's Shy Tuttle. Who's 93? Oh, that's Drake Jackson. I mean, Barber, 66. What are you guys talking about? Stop. They barely beat backups. We started a third-string 39-year-old quarterback who, by the way, played well. He played well on Christmas Day against Dallas as well. Not perfectly. I'm not saying that Josh Johnson was Josh Allen, okay, in either one of those two games. But I will tell you this. It is a reflection of an offensive coordinator who actually knows what he's doing, despite what many in the fan base believe. And that leads me to this, because I got this the other day, and I'm pretty sure I read it on my podcast on Friday, but I'm going to read it and respond to it right now. because Pete in Bethesda wrote me last week to say, Kevin, did you hear Cliff Kingsbury say he doesn't believe in quarterbacks being under center? That's it for me. I'm done with him and this offense. If he doesn't understand the benefits of the quarterback being under center, we need a new OC. His offense stunk this year, and he's stuck on clueless and stubborn. So, if you did not hear Cliff Kingsbury last week, I'll play for you the sound in which Pete refers to, and I will respond to that. And just this whole notion that many of you have, not all of you, that many of you have, that Cliff Kingsbury is somehow borderline, incapable of designing and calling an offense, and seemed to be absolutely thrilled with the news that the team may be moving on without him. More on that next. I'll get to my game take from the game yesterday. Surprisingly, the player of the game for me is not someone I think you are going to agree with. But we'll get to that when we get to the game take. We will go around the NFL that final weekend, the two games on Saturday, and then, of course, the game last night. Insane. We'll keep you posted on all the NFL firings on this Black Monday. So far, you probably know that Raheem Morris got fired last night. The Browns fired this morning Kevin Stefanski. There's a lot of discussion that he actually might get a head coaching job. He's that highly respected as a head coach and an offensive mind. Raheem Morris will be interesting because, of course, he's part of that Dan Quinn family group that we talked about. Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator in Atlanta, Raheem Morris, Al Harris. We'll see. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. So last week, Pete in Bethesda said, Kevin, did you hear Cliff Kingsbury say he doesn't believe in quarterbacks being under center? That's it for me. I'm done with him and this offense if he doesn't understand the benefits of the quarterback being under center. We need a new offensive coordinator. His offense stunk this year, and he's stuck on clueless and stubborn. So we've got a lot on the Cliff Kingsbury situation. By the way, today at 5 o'clock, and I'm assuming we will carry it live here on the Team 980, a season-ending press conference with Dan Quinn and Adam Peters. So we will have a lot to react to on tomorrow's show from the season ender. Today is locker cleanout day. It's exit interview with the players day. So it's a busy, busy day out at the park. And it begins, today, an off season that will be crucial for this team. It's year 3 of Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, etc. And at this point, they're 12-5 and then 5-12, although they did have 2 playoff wins, including 1 playoff loss last year. That does count for something for me. Anyway, that might just be me. But big off season. I tweeted this out at the end of the game that to me, it starts, it continues, and it ends with defense, because this was the worst defensive football team in my going back to the early 70s of following this team religiously. This was the worst. I mean, you might want to bring up 2016. 2016 was bad. One of the worst third down and long defenses. I think it was the worst in NFL history to that point in the Super Bowl era. But this defense did not do one thing well and did everything poorly. Everything. It does not take away, and I have been on this more than a lot of you have been. I get what they missed with all of the injuries. What was the number yesterday on the broadcast? 83 week 1 starter games missed, NFL high. That's the thing, is that when you talk about games missed, it's one thing, but starters games missed being an NFL high, that's where, we've talked about it all year. That was the difference with their decimation, from injuries season. It wasn't, backups and backups to the backups. It was all of their best players that kept going down. But still, that defense was never going to be good. You saw signs of it, early on when they were healthy, like the Atlanta game. And I know Dietrich Wise wasn't there. And Dorrance Armstrong was a big loss. And they were much worse after Dorrance Armstrong's exit than they were before. But it's going to be quite the offseason. And I'm telling you, man, looking at the league, and the league changes every year pretty much, but you can't suck on defense and be a threat this time of year. You just can't. They were last year. They were a threat despite a bad defense. But they got a little bit fortunate, during the regular season and then even in the postseason, where they faced teams that were banged up and not completely 100%. And then we saw it catch up to them in the NFC Championship game. But anyway, back to Cliff and this idea that many of you have that you'd be thrilled if the team moved on from him. And by the way, I think they're 2 separate conversations. Like for me, I can prefer a different style of offense, but also say very clearly, Cliff Kingsbury knows what he's doing. I mean, last year actually did happen. So Pete's email and many others like it referred to an exchange last week with John Kime. I think it was with John. God, man, I'm forgetting my favorite people on the beat and wanting to give them full credit for the question. But I'm pretty sure it was Kime who kind of asked, and it could have been Ben too. Whatever, not important to you guys. Understood. This was Cliff Kingsbury answering a question about just the style of offense and the under center trend this year. This year was a year in which we saw the best teams in the league, or most of them, be primarily more under center than a lot of the teams that didn't perform well, like Washington, who was dead last in under center percentage in usage. Here's what Cliff said last week.
Yeah, I have a different philosophy. I mean, we've been more with Josh, obviously, and Marcus. There's more of a comfort level, but I'm not of that where you have to be under a certain amount of times. I just have never bought into that.
So, that got a lot of people, fired up. A bit of I wouldn't call it a major firestorm on social media, but at least a mini firestorm about him at the very end saying, I just have never bought into that. The whole league's, seemingly, and it's not the whole league, but you know how these things get carried away. A lot of the really good teams are under center more than the teams that aren't so good. By the way, it's still not at a majority percentage. But needless to say that when he said at the end, I just have never bought into that you have to be under center for a certain amount or a certain percentage of the time. Got a lot of you experts out there fired up. And Pete, saying, did you hear Cliff Kingsbury say he doesn't believe in quarterbacks being under center? Well, Pete, that's not what he said. He didn't say, I don't believe in quarterbacks being under center. You guys have to just, calm down a little bit and not exaggerate what you think you're hearing to the point where it becomes not recognizable. He said, I'm not of that ilk where you have to be under center a certain amount of times. I've just never bought into that. He didn't say he doesn't believe in quarterbacks being under center. It's not what he said. Also, real quickly, Pete, their offense actually didn't stink this year. That's the irony of this. Without his starting quarterback, his starting running back, his wide receiver 1, his wide receiver 2, his wide receiver 3, his best offensive guard for the first 6 games of the season, they finished pretty much in the middle of the pack across the board on most of the advanced numbers. I bet you guys didn't even know that. Did you know that they were 7th in the league in red zone offense this year? So the offense actually didn't stink. But look, I'm not about to make the case that it was anywhere near what it was last year. But do you know why it wasn't anywhere near this year what it was last year? Pete and others that feel the way Pete does? Well, maybe it's because he didn't have the same players on the field. It wasn't because they weren't under center enough. If you think that their lack of success this year is because they weren't under center enough, you need your head examined. I mean, it's not even close as to what the number one reason was for their lack of success team-wide, but even offensively, because that's what we're talking about right now, specific to why they weren't as good on offense in 2025 as they were in 2024. Well, it's because they didn't have the same players on the field. And I'm not talking about Olamide Zaccheaus or De'Ami Brown. I'm talking about Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Austin Eckler, Sam Cosmi, Luke McCaffrey, Zach Ertz towards the end. I mean, come on. You gotta wrap your head around the fact that they didn't have a chance this year to be a good team, let alone good on offense, when your starting quarterback played 3 games, 3 start to finish completely healthy. 3 out of 17. What are we talking about? When you consider that offensively, this team finished pretty much in the middle of the pack in a lot of key categories, better than middle of the pack in the red zone, 7th in the league in red zone offense this year. But when you consider that they didn't stink on offense, well, that's where you have to say, well, why not? Well, because the coordinator's pretty good at what he does. We can disagree or agree, and I would agree with those that would say, yeah, I just prefer a different style of offense. So do I. I do too. But don't tell me that the offense stunk because the offensive coordinator didn't have him under center enough this year. You seriously need to be checked if you believe that's true. He didn't have players. By the way, he indicated that he was a bit more under center, kind of implied that he was a bit more under center with Josh and with Marcus. I haven't done the math on this. I would say Marcus and Jaden are the same. Like Marcus and Jaden prefer and are more comfortable in shotgun and pistol. Now, look, as far as like him just kind of blowing it off the under center conversation, which I guess you could put it that way if you want. It's not that he said he didn't believe in it. That's not what he said, but that he was kind of like, and if you watched him, you could kind of see this in his, expression. It was like, are you seriously guys gonna question? Like, I mean, I was the offensive coordinator of an elite offensive football team in the NFL last year. Elite offensive football team. Top 5 in pretty much every category. This year, I didn't have my best players on the field, and we still finished in the middle of the pack. By the way, I'll remind everybody, and I've said this before, I am much more, I totally think that a Shanahan-style offense is my preference. I do. And if Mike McDaniel became available and he was going to be our offensive coordinator, I'd be intrigued with that. More than intrigued, I'd be excited about it. I think it'd be great. But anyway, last year, just as a reminder, 3 of the final 4 teams, championship weekend, AFC Championship, NFC Championship, 3 of the 4 teams, the Skins, the Eagles, and the Chiefs, were among the least under center teams in the NFL. So I know it's going to be different, more likely than not this year. Okay, I get that, but I'm just pointing out a fact that that didn't happen in 1984 or 1994. That happened in 2024. There are a lot of different ways to skin the cat. Andy Reid, in Patrick Mahomes, have had a lot of success, haven't they? Are they under center a lot? No, near the bottom of the league in under center. This year, though, the results have been different. The under center teams have thrived. And, look, I know many of you believe that you actually know more than Cliff Kingsbury does about coordinating and calling an offense. Have at it. I don't. I don't feel like I know more than he does. So his answer last week didn't offend me, or it wasn't off-putting to me as it was with, several of you, many of you. Last year, Washington was an elite offensive football team. Yes, the quarterback had a lot to do with it. You know what? The quarterback usually has a lot to do with it. This year, with the best players on the team on offense out for a majority of the season, Cliff wasn't able to accomplish the same thing. Shocker. I am and haven't been nowhere near where some of you are, thinking that the team has an offensive coordinator problem. I'm just nowhere near that vicinity. Again, let me be clear. I do prefer Shanahan-style offense with more under center. I think it creates, based on what I know and watching football just like all of you, I think it creates more opportunities. I think Jaden also would thrive in that style of offense. I talked about that before the draft in 2024, that he will fit in any style offense, and I do believe that. But here's the thing. I don't have to think about what Jaden looks like in a Cliff Kingsbury offense. I know what he looks like in a Cliff Kingsbury offense. He looks great in a Cliff Kingsbury offense. I have 20 games of proof of how great he and the offense around him look in a Cliff Kingsbury offense. There's not a lot of proof this year because he only played in 3 games start to finish healthy. In 4 games total start to finish. I'd take the Green Bay game as not a start to finish healthy game. So I got 3 instead of 4. Some of you say, no, it's 4 games that he started and finished. Yes, he did start and finish 4, but he didn't start and finish 4 healthy. He started and finished 3 out of 17 healthy. So I'm not worked up over Cliff's answer. I'm just not. But, you can handle, I can anyway, sometimes. My wife doesn't necessarily agree with me on this, but I can handle more than one thought and belief at a time. I do prefer Shanahan style, more under center offenses, and I think Jaden would thrive in one. But I'm also not at all, or won't be displeased at all if Cliff Kingsbury comes back as the offensive coordinator. Now, as far as the reporting from over the weekend, so this was Diana's report. Diana reported in The Athletic on Saturday, quote, Washington has also had conversations about potentially moving on from Kingsbury, even if he doesn't get a head coaching job. Some in the building say there's been a disconnect between Kingsbury and general manager Adam Peters. When was the last time we were watching to see if an offensive coordinator was going to get fired while he was also preparing for head coaching interviews? We'll see how this shakes out. The Commanders likely won't make any final decisions until they see how the broader coaching market develops. Yeah, that last line, it just occurred to me for the first time because I've read Diana's report a few times since Saturday. You can't shoot people unless you've got their replacement and you know that the replacement is better. So, yeah, when she writes, we'll see how this shakes out. The Commanders likely won't make any final decisions until they see how the broader coaching market develops. They're talking about who would actually be available to come in and replace Kingsbury if they indeed decided to move on, even if he doesn't get a head coaching position. So I'm going to give you my thoughts. I'm going to give you what I was told. Ben had some reporting on it as well. We'll get to that and more. I'll get to my game take coming up here shortly because, we've got to finish it out, right? You start doing these game recaps after every regular season game. Hell, we do them for the preseason games. And yesterday was a glorified preseason game. Both teams. I will give you my game take from yesterday's season-ending 24-17 win over the Eagles that cost them 2 draft spots. By the way, that is a big deal. For those of you who think it's not a big deal, yeah, it's a big deal. Doesn't mean that it will ultimately be a big deal, but in the moment, you'd rather have 5 than 7. Isn't that kind of like, would you rather have a higher draft choice or a lower draft choice? Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, the team980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app. Don't forget, you can watch us on the Team 980's YouTube channel. When you get there, please hit the subscribe button for us and hit the like button for us. Helps us out.
All right, everybody. Happy Monday. NFL Week 18 wrapped up yesterday, so that means it is Black Monday. All of the news of head coaching moves breaking this morning. Last night, the Falcons have reportedly cleaned house, firing head coach Raheem Morris and GM Terry Fontenot. They are expected to hire a president of football operations, and it is rumored to be Matt Ryan. Now, Kevin Stefanski was fired this morning by the Browns. GM Andrew Berry will lead the search for a new Browns head coach. Giants GM Joe Shane expected to stick around for another offseason, and the Colts, they are retaining general manager Chris Ballard and head coach Shane Steichen. Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin also sticking around for another year in Cincinnati. Meanwhile, the Titans, they are wasting no time on their search, already requesting interviews with Chiefs coordinators Matt Nagy and Steve Spagnuolo. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type in the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live every day from 10 to 1. You can get programs like Take Command and Denton's Office throughout all of football season. Don't forget to hit the like button whenever you do decide to join us and turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
All right, so I mentioned what Diana reported about Cliff Kingsbury over the weekend. Again, I'll read it to you. Diana Rossini, The Athletic. We have had Diana on the show many, many times. Diana wrote, well, I had it here a second ago. It was right up in front of me. Where is it? Here it is. Quote, Washington has also had conversations about potentially moving on from Kingsbury, even if he doesn't get a head coaching job. Some in the building say there's been a disconnect between Kingsbury and GM Adam Peters. When was the last time we were watching to see if an offensive coordinator was going to get fired while he was also preparing for head coaching interviews? We'll see how this shakes out. The Commanders likely won't make any final decisions until they see how the broader coaching market develops. Ben, over the weekend, Ben does such a great job, talks to a lot of people. He had the following. He received a text from a high-ranking front office source from another organization that said that Kingsbury might not return regardless of whether he lands another job first. He writes about what Diana reported and said another source that he has, familiar with Washington's internal dynamics, described the situation succinctly, quote, intriguing theater, closed quote. So, look, this isn't my trade, but as most of you know, occasionally I talk to people, more than occasionally, and sometimes there's a nugget or two that's worth sharing. What I was told is this, nothing about whether or not, I don't know whether or not there's a possibility they move on from Cliff Kingsbury. But what I was told specifically was any thoughts of there being a disconnect, as in like a rift between Peters and Cliff Kingsbury, is not necessarily the case. That would be something that would be deemed to be sort of hyperbole, exaggeration. It doesn't mean necessarily, and I got no answers on, is this true? Do they want to move on from Cliff Kingsbury, whether he gets a head coaching job or not? Did not get one specific answer one way or the other on that. The only thing I did get was that the description of kind of a disconnect or, implying kind of a rift between Peters and Kingsbury is, exaggerated. They've known each other. Max reminded me of this before the show. They've known each other for, 20 years, going back to New England. When both of them, Cliff was there as a QB, as a backup to the backup, as a Josh Johnson type, but as a much younger player. And Adam Peters was a young, aspiring front office exec. So, yeah, look, again, on the Kingsbury situation, first of all, I can't tell you how I feel unless you tell me what the solution is. I'm not one of those people that just shoots without a solution unless it's so obvious that there should be a shooting, that there should be a firing. In this case, it's far from obvious. We are not even, at this point, 12 months removed from this offense running roughshod through two playoff opponents on the road. I mean, in being a truly elite 2024 offensive football team. And for those of you that would say, and I don't wildly disagree with this, that it was all Jaden Daniels. It was certainly mostly Jaden Daniels, and there's no doubt about it. But what he created was an environment for Jaden to thrive in. He was comfortable as a rookie player. Everything they did was comfortable. And by the way, he does scheme it up well and at times call it well. I've had my beefs with Kingsbury play calling, especially this year. The Minnesota end of, opening drive, that one's a head scratcher for me. I mean, especially with Chris Rodriguez. I'm telling you, man, Chris Rodriguez outstanding again yesterday. I like him a lot. Like, I think he could be a number one back, not Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Derrick Henry, but, a solid, middle to upper middle of the pack starting running back. Bill too. I'm not, saying it as if I don't believe in Krosky Merritt. I just like Rodriguez. But I honestly cannot tell you what will happen. But to me, if Kingsbury comes back, I'm fine with that. Totally fine with that. If they decided that Kevin Stefanski, as an example, or a Mike McDaniel, or, it's not like there's a slew of Shanahan style guys out there, although Stefanski is part of that tree. And so I like Kevin Stefanski. I think was good in Minnesota. I think he was good in Cleveland. They said they did not have a quarterback at any point. Not to mention it's a completely dysfunctional franchise. It's just like Stefanski is going to walk away from that with the rest of the league viewing the people that used to walk away from Washington. It's like, yeah, but you were in Washington. Yeah, but he was in Cleveland. He's a 2-time Coach of the Year recipient, which is kind of nuts in Cleveland. Anyway, yeah, I will. I'm really when it comes to the Cliff conversation. If he's back, I'll be excited and fine with it. If he isn't, and there's a solution that they have a Shanahan style, a Stefanski, a Mike McDaniel, I'd be excited about that too. I would be. But I'm not with a lot of you where I am like just over Cliff Kingsbury. I don't get it. I don't. Did you see what he was able to do with Josh Johnson in the last 2 games of the year? Playing backups. I mean, that's the most comical, response to yesterday's game from many of you that I've heard all year. They could barely beat backups. Meantime, we're starting a third string 39-year-old quarterback. All right. When we come back, I will take some time to do it the way we've done it all year, every year, and that is to recap the game, no matter how insignificant the game was. There was some good, there was some bad, and I will share with you what Jaden Daniels' mother thinks of Cliff Kingsbury when we return. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com. So they won their season finale 24-17 against the Eagles, if you weren't paying attention. And it cost them 2 draft slots. They knew that going into the game because the results in the 1 o'clock window, Cleveland beating Cincinnati 20-18, and the Giants hammering the Cowboys 34-17. How about the Giants? Whew, we're not the only market that complains about winning meaningless games to lose draft slots. Washington went into the 4 o'clock window, their game at 4:25 against the Eagles, knowing that they were worst case 7th with a win. Worst case with a loss was going to be 5th, but it could have improved from there as well had some other teams like the Cardinals won, which they did not. But anyway, look, as far as the overall playing and winning a game that's completely meaningless, to me, I have two essentially competing thoughts, or I don't know if they're competing. Actually, they're not competing thoughts. They're just thoughts that can both exist in the same world, and that is, I would have preferred that they lost the football game. I'm a fan of the team, but because I'm a fan of the team, when you get to the last week of the season, that game was meaningless. That's not a culture build game. That's not a carryover game. They're playing their backups, and you're playing your third string quarterback. They're at least playing their second string quarterback. We're playing our third string quarterback, which you could say going into it is a certain organizational attempt, right, to not win the football game. I'm sure there were people in that organization that were like, let's play really well. Let's not get anybody hurt. Let's lose, on a field goal at the gun. In regulation, let's not go to overtime. Those thoughts, I'm sure, were with some in the front office, because here's the thing. There is a difference between picking 5th and 7th heading into the offseason. Again, would you rather have a higher pick after a miserable season or a lower pick after a miserable season? It's not that hard. If you're a fan of the team, you should prefer on draft night to have the higher pick. Why? Because you potentially have more leverage with a higher pick. You potentially can get a higher rated player. Doesn't mean you're going to be right. The draft is the ultimate crapshoot. It's the thing we know the least amount. It's the thing they know the least amount. Despite how much attention is paid to the NFL draft, it's the number one thing that we as fans know the least about, and it's the number one thing that the teams themselves that have all of the information know the least about. So of course I get the idea that number 7 might end up being a lot better than number 5, but that doesn't change the fact that it would be better to have number 5 than number 7. I can't help you if you can't figure that out. So rooting against your team in a game like yesterday so that you end up with a higher pick is not somehow a disqualifier to be a fan. In fact, you could say it the other way, and it would have just as much merit. That rooting for them to win is a disqualifier if you really want what's best for the overall organization. Of course, I would have preferred them to have lost the game. Yesterday was not, there was no drama. Even the 2-point play, the rubbing it in 2 weeks ago, that didn't play into yesterday when most of the players that participated in that particular play weren't even playing. There's nothing there. The rivalries are dead for our organization. I want them resurrected. Last year was a step in the right direction. But for, 20 years, Dallas, the Giants, and Philly, they don't think about us the way some of us think about them. And why would they? They just haven't had, a competitive, fourth division team along for the last, 2-decade plus ride. So that didn't play into it for me, rivalry. I wish, I really do wish, and I said this last May, I wish they had not waited until the final 3 weeks of the season to play these 2 Eagle games. coming off of last year, it certainly would have felt much bigger and more important in the moment had they played early in the season. Had they played on opening night, or had they played in, a week 5 or week 7 Sunday night or something like that. Even when we didn't have much, and it wouldn't have gone well, more likely than not. But, you always take risk in an NFL schedule making process when you take 2 of your highlighted games in a conference and you put them in the final 3 weeks of the season. We had Mike North, the key schedule maker, on multiple times last spring. And he said there's great risk in that, because forget the fact that one of the teams or both of them might stink by the time you get there. You certainly, in the week 18 slot, there's, it's even money one of the 2 teams is going to have nothing to play for. In this particular spot yesterday, neither team had anything. Washington didn't have anything to play for, but Philly treated it as if they had nothing to play for. I say that, and I would not personally question Nick Sirianni at this point if I were an Eagle fan with what they've been able to accomplish. He knows his team better than the fans do, and if they felt like rest and health, guaranteed health, and that extra week, even if it meant a different opponent, even if it meant going on the road in week 2 of the postseason, I don't think Philly fears playing anywhere. But their success in the postseason, let's not forget, has happened during this era of Philly, dominance, has happened at home. It's happened at the Link. So they put themselves into a position where losing that game and having Chicago lose means that a second round game against Chicago potentially, and Chicago is an underdog, so they might end up, hosting that game anyway in round 2. By the way, that's a decent possibility. Green Bay beats Chicago, Philly beats San Francisco. Philly would end up hosting in the divisional round anyway. But they chose to play it the way they chose to play it. And in Washington's case, they didn't, play Jaden down the stretch. I wish they hadn't played Terry yesterday, even though to me he was the player of the game. More on that coming up in a moment when I get into the specifics of yesterday's game, if you're even interested. Yeah, I mean, bottom line is 2 things are true. One, I have no issue with those that are rooting for them to lose. My preference, as I'm watching the game, is please don't score here. Please, let's not win the game. You've done a nice job here through 3 quarters. You're down 17-10. You haven't embarrassed yourself. Your team's played hard for you down the stretch. There is no doubt about that. All of those things are important, I'm sure, to the culture that nobody quit on Dan. I acknowledge that. I do. Which was very obvious over these last 4 games, really starting with that Giant game, the 4 division games. They played hard and they had a chance in all 4 of them. I mean, they had a chance. They beat the Giants. They had a chance against Philly, up going into the second half, up going into the fourth quarter. Were they up going into the fourth quarter or just up going into the third quarter? I think that they were just up going into the third quarter when Marcus Mariota got hurt in that game. Had a chance against Dallas on Christmas Day, down 7 late in the game, and certainly ended up winning yesterday. I acknowledge all of those things, and that's the second part of it. To me, we can root for what we want to root for, but I also understand that the players on the field are not going to openly try to lose the game. That's an organizational thing. And by starting Josh Johnson, that's a step in the right direction, even though he's experienced. Maybe it would have been better had they started Sam Hartman and said, Sam's been with us for a while. We want to see what Sam has, knowing that it would be worse than it would have been with Josh Johnson. I absolutely would not have played Terry McLaurin yesterday. I mean, I'm glad he came out healthy. Super glad he came out healthy, but I would have never played him. I would have not. I wouldn't have played Kinlaw. Probably not even Payne. Last thing you needed was Payne getting hurt to where, the injury prevented you from cutting him and getting the cap savings. So, yeah, I think there were a lot of questionable decisions as it relates to that. But ultimately, the people they put on the field and the coaches themselves, to them, I recognize what it is. It's one of 17. There just aren't this many opportunities. They're playing for jobs. They're playing for opportunities. And the coaches, when you're invested, when you are on that journey, and I can't speak to it, most of you can't speak to it, but no matter what your journey is, it could be in your job, during a project or a year-long thing. I mean, you're not bailing at the end because you've got the big picture and other people's job securities in mind. I understand what they're doing out there yesterday. Doesn't mean that I can't root for it to end in a loss. Because, again, picking 5th is better than picking 7th. That's not a matter of opinion. It's a fact. And it doesn't guarantee anything, as we know. But you'd rather pick higher if you're in a miserable season with a meaningless game at the end than lower. And they're going to end up picking 2 spots lower. They're probably going to have a really good player at their disposal. And look, the lack of quarterbacking in this upcoming draft, elite level quarterbacking, there's not going to be a big overpayment to move up to a certain spot to get a quarterback. I don't think there will be. I mean, and 7 gives you much less of an opportunity for that than 5 does. All right, let's get to the game. So 24-17, they outscored Philly 14-0 in the fourth quarter. I've got good, I've got bad, I've got other from the game. I'm going to start with this. To me, Terry McLaurin was, not up against Quinyon Mitchell and some of the really good Philly defensive backs, but Terry drew 4 defensive penalties in the game. He caught 4 balls on 4 targets for 57 yards and drew 4 legitimate defensive penalties for first downs. Yes, it would have been much better to have Terry in 2025 for more than 9 games. It would have been better to have him and Jaden out there for 17. I think the results would have been different. How much different with that defense? Not so much different, because that was a travesty all season long. Terry McLaurin leads my list of good yesterday. Cliff Kingsbury's on my good list. Yes, he is. Why? Well, because third string 39-year-old Josh Johnson was out there quarterbacking. I don't care who was on the other side. I know who was on our side. I mean, remember what he looked like when he came in against Philadelphia in the second half? He's actually put together 2 very competent performances. And so Cliff gets credit for, a team. Look, Kansas City was playing the Raiders yesterday. Their starters are Philly's third stringers. And they could not move the football with an Andy Reid coaching a third-string quarterback, Matt Nagy coaching a third-string quarterback at all. They couldn't, by the way, do it at all down the stretch once they lost to Mahomes. And was it Minshew? Minshew was the backup, right, that also got hurt. And yet this team continued to at least look more than competent offensively. 25 first downs in the game, 6 of 11 on third down, 3 for 4 in the red zone, 24 points. Third string 39-year-old quarterback who was 14 of 22 for 131 yards and really did some good things with his legs off schedule as well. They were balanced yesterday, 32 called runs, 31 called pass plays. Josh Johnson ended up scrambling on several of those called pass plays. A good day for Cliff Kingsbury, given what he had to work with. Yes, against backups. But when you focus just on the backups and you ignore that Washington was starting their third string 39-year-old quarterback, I'm not sure why that's a big issue. On my list of good, I think Josh Johnson made so many really good plays in this game. I wrote them down. Here they are. First drive of the game, 2nd and 9. They ran that fake screen, and it was a great throw on a slant to Terry. On that same drive, an immediate, decisive, versus the blitz scramble up the A-gap for 14 yards. Second drive of the game, 3rd and 7, he gets drilled and he throws a first down completion to Terry McLaurin. 4th drive of the game, which was the one before the end of the half. Didn't love Quinn's usage of timeouts on defense. It's not his best thing, It wasn't this year anyway. But he makes 2 really good throws and then a really good scramble to get to field goal range. I think they could have spiked it sooner and maybe had another snap. But they ended up kicking a 56-yard field goal. Jake Moody did after he missed the 24-yarder. Second half, the bad play was the fumbled snap. I mean, that was not a bad snap from Allegretti. I didn't think it was that bad, and the Eagles recovered it. That was, it's funny when it happened. I'm like, all right, good. Like, let's get Philly into the end zone for the lead here. And they took the lead off of that turnover. He had a really good play early in the fourth quarter where he escaped immediate pressure, scrambled, ran for 9 or 10 yards. Had a really good, on that 3rd and goal touchdown pass to Bates, the touchdown run on the boot on, 3rd and goal at the 2. I mean, Josh Johnson has been around with all of these teams for all of these years for a reason, or reasons plural. Number one is, as Jay Gruden once said, one of the smartest players he's ever coached. Number two is clearly a good dude in the locker room, somebody who is fine with his position and, embraces it and is ready as a professional when his number is called. What his biggest issues over the years, number one, accuracy, big issue with him over the years. And number two, at times, just trying to do too much, like that Philadelphia interception that he threw when he came in for Mariota in the loss at home. Josh Johnson on my good list. I'm looking at it right now because I didn't even know this. 89.4 QBR in the game. Wow. I wouldn't have guessed it would have been that high. I mean, he made a lot of good plays, but that's got to be for him one of his highest QBR games of his career. Has to be, I would guess. Also on the good list, man, I'm a Chris Rodriguez fan. I like Krosky Merritt too. Don't get me wrong. I like both of them. The running back situation is far from dire. It's like way down the list. Way down the list. Like you start with, everything on defense, all 3 levels, and the coordinator. But Chris Rodriguez just runs hard. He's got better vision between the tackles than you'd think for somebody his size, better feet. 16 of 65 in the game. I thought he was really good. He's an RFA. He's a restricted free agent, and he was last year. So they're going to have to, you don't want to be in a position where you feel like with all the needs you have on defense, and that's, again, where it starts, continues, and ends in this offseason, you've got to totally overhaul the defensive side of the ball. But if you end up with Rodriguez, Krosky Merritt, and McNichols as your backs next year, I think we're going to be okay with that. Would I prefer to have a Bijan Robinson? Yeah, of course. And Jeremiah Love is special. Special. He's going to be a special back. I think he is. I mean, again, we know the least amount when it comes to the draft as anything else we talk about. But if he's there at 7, as maybe you could argue, I think Kuiper has him as the number 1 player in the draft. Look that up for me, Max. My son told me that yesterday, that Kuiper's got Jeremiah Love as the number 1 player in this draft. I mean, if you're at 7 and he's still on the board because you just don't take a running back, in the top 5 or 6, although it's happened more, I guess Barkley was the most highest recently. But I like Rodriguez. I like Chris Rodriguez. I thought yesterday defensively that, it was a competent performance. I mean, again, you're putting players out there that probably have 1 foot out the door, although they didn't play that way. They didn't play that way at all down the stretch. The Minnesota game was the outlier. Every other game down the stretch was a trying super hard to win the game because there clearly is, a decent culture and a decent belief in Dan Quinn and the staff. And more importantly, whether it's a belief or not, there's a respect level for that. And I think, in the overarching kind of personality trait of the players on the team, there's a lot more good quality-wise than bad. And they're playing it out competitively until the end. But I thought, there were a couple of players I thought, Payne flashed, McGee flashed. The pass rush just in general seemed to bother Tanner McKee. It seemed to be immediate. There were a couple of 4-man rushes, but with, more blitz, looks. I mean, Noah I had an early off the edge blitz that was disruptive. I still, though, defensively, I'll get to that when I get to the bad list. But they made some really good stops on third down defensively. There was the 4th and 1 on the third drive. That was pressure. He was flushed. He threw incomplete. There was the 3rd and 1 stop on Philly's opening drive of the second half. I think that may have been Martin. There was the 4th and 3, the final 4th and 3, incomplete pass. They had him flushed and pressured, So at least our defense, which did include, several starters. I mean, they've lost their best players during the course of the year defensively, but at least against Philly's backup players, they didn't get trampled on. I guess that would be the good part. Moody's 56-yard field goal is on my good list. His 24-yard field goal missed in the first half is on my bad list. I'll get to the bad and the other when we come back, and then you guys can weigh in on anything you want. The Cliff Kingsbury situation, the game yesterday, winning it, losing the draft slots, whatever is on your mind. We'll go open phones for about 20 minutes, 301-230-0980. Ben will join us at 12, and we will look at some of the key games and recap some of the key games from the weekend next hour as well. So phone lines are now open, 301-230-0980. Kevin Sheehan Show, Team 980 and the team980.com. From Kevin, Josh Johnson was the only backup player Washington played. Philly played all backups. Embarrassing that it was close. You're wrong. This is the thing this morning that I'm most confused by. The most important position on the field was manned by a third-string 39-year-old for Washington yesterday. The fact that Philly play, by the way, Philly did play some of their starters. Not many, but Jordan Davis was on the field. He's been dominant. Nolan Smith was on the field. I noticed him. Brandon Graham, he's not a starter, I guess. Jomo was on the field. Devontae Smith started the game. I know he came out for the most part. And offensively, they didn't play their starters. Washington also did. I think I'm right about this. Their starting center didn't play. Their starting guard didn't play. Their starting left tackle didn't play. So is that 3 out of their starting 5 offensive line absent from yesterday's game?
Well, do you want to count Sam Cosmi too? Because that would be 4.
I just counted Cosmi. I counted Cosmi, Tunsil, and Biotish.
Yeah, no, that's right. And Chris Paul was out because of injury or because of illness.
No, Chris Paul played.
Yeah, you're right. I'm amalgamating.
I think Chris Paul played. Allegretti played center, but Chris Paul played.
No,
I think it was 3 of their starting 5. Are you saying that it's 4? What would be Connerly played? So Connerly and Paul played. That's 2 of your 5. 3 of their starting 5 were out. Your starting tight end is out. Your starting quarterback is out. You're still down multiple receivers from River Craycraft. Anybody heard of him? He was out there running around for us. Colson Yankoff was out there running around. Chris Moore was back on the field running around. What are you guys talking about? I mean, seriously. You had 66 Barber out there for a bunch of snaps. Number 79, I had to look him up again because I forgot who he was. He's out there. I mean, who cares, really? But this idea that they barely beat a team playing their backups as if we were playing our best players, played a third-string 39-year-old quarterback. The bad on my list from yesterday. Look, this is what happens when you have a lot of players out there that aren't used to playing. Third-string quarterback, River Craycraft, Chris, the whole thing. 3 new offensive linemen. Is you end up with a lot of unnecessary timeouts. They actually called one on defense, too. You end up with, too many false start penalties. Sinnott had 2 of them. So that's on the bad list. I did not like the way Quinn handled the very end of the first half. There's just an opportunity to save 40 seconds with a timeout on defense. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he's thinking, hey, you know what? We're down, 14 to, what was it at that point? 14 to 10, 17 to 10, whatever it was. No, at the end of the first half, it was 10-7. They were up 10-7. And they got that interception from Jeremy Reeves. By the way, I love Jeremy Reeves. Everything about him. Love Jeremy Reeves. Should have added him to the good list. But they had an opportunity at, I think it was a minute 38 to call a timeout after a Bigsby run. And they're in Washington's red zone. So if they come away with points, they're not. See, here's the thing that coaches sometimes get confused with. Yes, I'm questioning this part because coaches really are bad at this overall. And we citizens of the NFL sometimes do know a little bit more when it comes to clock management. Philly's not going to run out of time, Dan. By not calling your timeout, it's not like they're going to run out of time. They've got a minute and a half, and they're already at your 19-yard line. They're not running out of time. They have timeouts too. So use a timeout on defense, and let's save 40 seconds so that when they do score or when we get an interception, we got a little bit more time with the football. Because by the time we took over after the pick, there were 35 seconds less than should have been on the clock. They had that last time out to burn. But they did do a nice job of getting into field goal range. I give Cliff a lot of credit. He understood 40-something seconds. You can throw underneath. You can throw in the middle of the field. He hits McNichols. He hits Terry. And then, he scrambles. The quarterback scrambles. Now, at the end of that play, I would have spiked it sooner and run one more snap because the dude had just missed a 24-yard field goal. and you're like okay with him kicking a 56-yarder, that seems a bit sketchy to me. He made it, though, but I would have run another play by spiking it faster after the scramble rather than letting the clock tick down to 6 seconds and spiking it and having the kick be the last play of the first half. Defensively still, it's just amazing to me how many easy pitches and catches there are against our team. That first touchdown throw to the tight end, Calcavecchia, who, by the way, on that hip drop tackle by Reeves, it wasn't an egregious hip drop. He moved to the side, and unfortunately his ankle, leg, knee, or whatever got Calcaterra was his name, 81. But that touchdown catch, how many times have we seen just easy pitches and catches? And another day in which, honestly, if the other team had just lined it up and run it, more, they ran it 19 times and threw it 40 times with Tanner McKee. Because Tank Bigsby was at nearly 5 yards a clip. I think he was. Let me just see where it was. 16 to 75, 4.7 yards per clip. He's actually a good addition for them. It's a good back for them. I sometimes, look, they have Tanner McKee. They probably wanted to see what he had because they like him. I mean, during that game, Ross Tucker was on the call of that game. Ross is a Philadelphia guy, even though he played here. I think Ross does a really good job, actually, as an analyst in these games. But, he talked about it at the beginning of the year. But if you had followed Philly at all during the offseason and during the preseason, there were a lot of people that thought Tanner McKee actually is a better thrower of the football than Jalen Hurts. Not a better quarterback. I thought he was not great yesterday by any stretch of the imagination. I still think if they had given Bigsby 26 carries instead of 16, that they would have had a better chance to win the game. But Philly's moving on at 11-6, and going to have a chance to defend their existing current championship. What else is on my list? Yeah, that's it. I had a couple of other things real quickly. I thought that when Washington tied the game on the Chris Rodriguez touchdown run on 2nd and goal, I thought he scored on 1st and goal. Did they? I forget if they replayed it and showed that. And they went hurry up. They ended up scoring on the next play, but I actually thought there could have been an opportunity. I hate when you have an opportunity to challenge a big, spot like that was a first down or that was a touchdown, and you decide to go hurry on a 4th down. Let's say, now this was a 2nd down, but on a 4th down, rather than, wait a minute, we already did the work. We actually got the first down or we got the touchdown. The big play for Philly, man, in that first half when this was before the Reeves interception, before the end of that first half where Reeves got the pick, they had the 1st and goal at the 1 on that throw to Darius Cooper. And then he got the unsportsmanlike conduct for spinning the ball right in Jonathan Jones's face. What an idiot. You get an opportunity to play for the first time. And he's this receiver who had a couple of catches, and he's got a big catch down to the 1 yard line, and you get up and you cost your team 15 yards from that spot. And ultimately they throw a pick and get no points instead of going into the break up 14-10, because Quinn probably wouldn't have called the timeout. What else did I have? I don't know. That's kind of it. Yeah. All right, your turn. 301-230-0980. I did promise to tell you what Jaden Daniels' mother tweeted out about Cliff Kingsbury. I'll do that when we come back, and I'll take your calls when we come back. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980 and the team980.com.
All right, we got some more Black Monday news after Week 18 wraps up yesterday. Pete Carroll out as the Raiders head coach. Tom Brady and John Spytek will lead the search for the new Raiders head man. all of the coaching news coming out of Atlanta. The Falcons, they cleaned house yesterday, firing Raheem Morris and GM Terry Fontenot. Matt Ryan, rumored to be in line for the president of football ops role. He will likely make the selection for the next Falcons head coach. Kevin Stefanski was also fired this morning by the Browns. Andrew Berry will lead the search for a new head coach in Cleveland. Giants general manager Joe Shane expected to stick around for another offseason and select another head coach for the Giants. The Colts are retaining general manager Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen. Zach Taylor and Duke Tobin also sticking around another year in Cincinnati, but the Titans, they are wasting no time on their search, already requesting interviews with Chiefs coordinators Matt Nagy and Steve Spagnuolo. This update is sponsored by the Team 980 YouTube page. Just open the app, type of the Team 980, hit subscribe. Kevin Sheehan is live every day from 10 to 1. You can catch programs like Take Command in Denton's office throughout all of football season. Don't forget to hit the like button. Whenever you do decide to join us, turn on notifications to stay up to date on all things DC sports. And that is what's trending.
So Jaden Daniels' mother tweeted out the following at the end of the game yesterday. Headed in the right direction. Let's go. Exclamation point, exclamation point. Officially loading JD5/KK Season 3. Heart emoji, heart emoji. Hashtag raise hail. Hashtag HTTC in lowercase. And then hashtag in uppercase HTTR.
She's a smart woman.
She is smart. I've heard she's very, very smart. Yeah, so there you go. Jaden's mom, involved for sure. I'm not comparing to 2012. I'm not. It's not even close. Remember, the big difference between where we are today and where we were in previous horrific seasons is that Dan Snyder's not here anymore, people. There's actually a chance to turn it around. And then on top of that, we have a quarterback. It was a terrible season, a disappointing season, a miserable season to sit here and go through. But it was also very much, it is very much a possibility that it was very much an aberration due to being the most injured team in the league when it came to their most important players. All right, your turn. 301-230-0980. Let's start with our guy Skip in D.C. Skip, go ahead.
Kevin, last time I talked to you about, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I said I was okay with 5-12 just because, it's a 500 and you count the playoffs, it's over 500. And I was okay with it, even though I was a little concerned about losing that draft position, which I still am. But I'm going to live with it. However, the other thing I talked about, I did mention Cliff, and I thought everything you said today, I said that I would prefer a different style offense. I think I called it pro style, but what I meant was exactly what you said, a Shanahan style offense. I think Jaden would do very well. Everything you said today. I never mentioned college offense regarding Cliff Kingsbury. I have a lot of respect for Cliff. I think he will do very well wherever he goes. I think he did well last year. I was not trying to say anything negative about him or calling it a college offense. But afterwards, you kind of implied that I did, but I didn't. So I just want to clear the record on that. Okay?
If I did that, I can't remember the call. I love you as a caller. I don't remember specifically the occurrence. Offense. But let's deal with where are you today?
So with the present. I look around the NFL, and I don't understand people that don't just love the NFL and just focus on our team. I'm like you. I don't get that.
I love this time of year. Even with our team not in it. I'd prefer our team be in it, but it's been so often that we haven't. I think this is the most dramatic portion of the sports calendar. Yeah. These one-and-done playoff games.
And what I see, Kev, I see teams that have a promising future. They have a coach that's either a master in offense, like Ben Johnson in Chicago, or the coach in Jacksonville, married with a quarterback, or a team that a coach who masters defense, like in Houston and Seattle, and then they find an offensive coordinator, and so those seem to work well. However, we're stuck with a coach who was supposed to be a master of defense, but not really, because his defenses didn't do so well in the playoffs against certain teams. And so he's more like a culture builder and overall CEO type coach.
What's Nick Sirianni?
I was just getting ready to mention Nick Sirianni. Mm-hmm. And I also think Mike Vrabel, even though he does master in defense, he's kind of that kind of guy too.
Right.
So it can work. However, we're now in a position where we may be looking for both a defensive coordinator and an offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
And that's
we're definitely looking for a defensive coordinator, because we've got the big difference between the DC and the OC conversation is we've got 2 full seasons of horrific defense. Offensively, we've got one elite level big game NFC championship season of offense, and we've got one season of average offense, but your starting quarterback only played in 3 complete games start to finish healthy.
But like you, Kevin, I would love to see Jaden with a Shanahan-style offense.
Me too. I think he'd thrive in that.
Talent.
But I know what he thrived in last year. Cliff's up-tempo, a little bit more horizontal at times, relying a little bit too much at times, I thought, for the quarterback to play hero ball. Andy Reid's got a lot of that in him. We've seen a lot of that in Philadelphia the last couple of years at times. And, the bottom line is we know that it worked, and it can work, and it has worked. Doesn't mean it's my preference, but for people to think that he can't coordinate and call an offense, I mean,
right, Adam Peters may be concerned that he doesn't protect the quarterback with that offense.
Look, you know what I think about some of the plays. I'd take out some of those designed runs for sure. Thanks, Skip. Appreciate it as always. Let's go to Reggie in D.C. Reggie, go ahead.
Kevin, first of all, man, I freaking love your show. Some of the Kevin, I was gonna call him Kevin Maniac. Some of the calls that call in, Kevin, it burns it grinds my gears. I'm glad you said, right? We know we don't have to guess. We don't have to, he may look good in the Shanahan offense. This is what we do know. We know that in the Kingsbury offense, we know our quarterback looks like a one game away from a Super Bowl quarterback. We don't have to guess. We don't have to try to, again, Shanahan's offense is great, absolutely. But it looks great with Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, McCaffrey, because I just watched them against Seattle and only scored 6 points. Why? Because they didn't have the pieces around. Yeah. Give me the pieces around in this offense. And you got to know this, Kevin. We got to know. We knew this, that getting Kingsbury, it was going to be this type of offense. Up-tempo. He ran Kyler Murray. I think that's the reason why that we probably got Kingsbury. Just, again, think about all the quarterbacks that he was able to develop when he was at Tech and then also in the NFL. And again, let us mess around. Go ahead and get rid of Kingsbury, right? And we got to get a new offensive coordinator. Mm-hmm. And then he now got to learn new terminology. He got to learn the offense because all of this will Ben Johnson. Caleb Williams is completing 58% of his passes. The team around Caleb is good. They're getting turnovers at just an amazing clip, right. And they run the ball well. But Caleb Williams, if you're looking at quarterback, he doesn't turn the ball over, so I'm going to give him that. He's completing 58% of his passes. I don't think we need to change the offense right now. Again, I'm just going to chalk up this season to it's just one of those seasons. Baldy mentioned it on the telecast that the Commanders had the most week 1 offensive injuries of any team, I think lost games or whatever it was.
83 week, it was Ross Tucker. 83 week 1 starter games missed, highest in the NFL by a lot.
Yes. And then also, Kevin, about this, what if, again, because you kind of hear the conversations with Jayden, right? When he talks about, hey, I talked to Cliff and some things I'll take out, I don't like, and he's open door and there's a good conversation. What if Jayden says, I want him as my OC? You got to go with your
Jayden's mom said that.
Oh, well, that's enough for me then. That means Jayden said it. Come on, Kevin. You gotta be fair with this.
It's enough that Jayden's mom wants it. But we both know Jayden's mother is speaking probably for Jayden. One thing real quickly, Reggie, one thing real quickly, because, one of the things that I thought was misrepresented about Cliff in Arizona in particular is that they didn't run the football. They actually were in the top half of the league of run to pass breakdown. And it wasn't just Kyler Murray. Remember, James Conner had a big part in that rush offense. So did the guy that's on our team now, Chase Edmonds. They carried the ball a lot more than Kyler Murray did. But anyway, thanks for the call, Reggie.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate you, buddy.
Let's go to Aveen. Aveen, go ahead.
Hey, Kevin, I've got to say things are feeling dysfunctional to me with this organization. You're telling me at the end of year 2 of Dan Quinn, the defense is a disaster, no progress has been made, and now we're possibly considering replacing both of his handpicked coordinators. I'm sure Kingsbury doesn't appreciate while he's going to be interviewing.
By the way, we don't know that they're considering replacing. There's reporting that suggests that. I mean, let's Let's see how it plays out. First of all, you'd have to have like a home run solution to move on from Kingsbury, but continue.
Yeah, and I'm sure Kingsbury doesn't appreciate while he's preparing for interviews these reports coming out that they're considering moving on from him anyways. That seems kind of dysfunctional to me too.
He strikes me as a guy that isn't going to be bothered by that stuff because he knows he's been a head coach before. He's been under the microscope, and he knows how Adam Peters and Dan Quinn feel about him. Whichever way it is, I would imagine he knows the truth. And maybe it is the truth, and he's frustrated by that. But in terms of it being the reporting that bothers him, I would doubt that.
Okay. I still don't think it's a good look, though.
I don't think it's a good look that anything got leaked, by the way. I haven't even mentioned that. Yeah. The fact that this has been an unleakable organization since this new regime took over, and this was a legitimate leak. People inside the building saying there's a disconnect, a borderline rift between Peters and Kingsbury. Correct me if I'm wrong, Aveen, you followed this thing so closely that I trust what your memory on this. There haven't been many leaks, if any at all.
No, I was surprised to see it. It's not something you usually see. I was really surprised, especially Kingsbury. You never hear anything about Kingsbury, anything bad. So to me, I feel like it would be a bad situation if, next season Dan Quinn is going into, this kind of make or break season for him. I mean, if the defense isn't playing well next season, he's going to be on the immediate hot seat. So he's going into this make or break season with two new coordinators. That doesn't feel like a good situation. And I would ask him at this year-end press conference, I would say, Dan, you have a defensive background. You've been here 2 years. Adam, you came here, with a lot of resources at your disposal. No progress has been made on the defense. Why should you guys be trusted to be able to turn it around? I'll just be interested to see what they say to that. But, to me, I kind of feel like, I don't think there's any chance of this happening, but I'm just kind of wondering what's the point of having Dan Quinn here if he can't positively, contribute to the defense. And to me, I just kind of think, this is an attractive destination. If you really like Kevin Stefanski and think he's an elite coordinator who can be paired with Jaden, I would do a full court press for him. I mean, is it worth keeping Dan Quinn over just because he gets along with the owner and the GM really well? Or if you really like Chris Shula, who's, a McVay guy who's been there with McVay since 17, I would still do a full court press. I'm just wondering.
I'm just going to tell you right now, that is not that kind of precedent of being that impulsive. Are you suggesting moving on from Dan Quinn and hiring Kevin Stefanski to be the head coach?
Yeah, if you think
that kind of thing is it has to be taken much more beyond satisfying an immediate sort of emotional thought, because we lived that experience for 24 seasons, right? And it is not a good message to put out to the rest of the league that your owner is so impulsive that he will move on from a head coach who in his first season had a 12-5 regular season record and won 2 road playoff games, and then coached the most injured team the following season and had a 5-12 season and got fired. I think that there are bigger picture, longer term ramifications that have to be considered. I'd suggest that as part of the thinking. Even if you thought, hey, you know what? Kevin Stefanski's a better head coach, and he'd be focused on one side of the ball, and he could bring Jim Schwartz with him to be the defensive coordinator. I'm not telling you that if that happened, I'd be sitting here thinking, oh my God, that's terrible. I've been a Stefanski fan and a Schwartz fan. I'm just telling you that I think that's a dangerous way to operate as the owner of the football team, or even the general manager. Some of that goodwill that Ben wrote about during the summer about how the culture totally changed and how people like Washington, believe in Washington. They've always believed in Quinn, the person, believe in Adam Peters. You throw a lot of that away when you're that impulsive. Because this season, for anybody in the league, they understand what happened here this year. Washington was crippled to its core in terms of what it had coming in and what it had last year. And it's really hard to blame the head coach for that. I got to move
Yeah,
on.
but-
I'm up against it. You guys that are on hold that I didn't get to, we'll come back hopefully at the very end of the show and take a few more calls, and we'll have all week to do it as well. Ben Standing will join us next. He's still standing after a 5-12 season. Not too good, but there were some others that were worse. Ben Standig is with us. Ben, of course, writes and covers this team via his Substack column. I recommend subscribing to it. You can get a link to it by following Ben on X on Twitter at Ben Standig. He's got a podcast called Last Man Standing. So we will get to some of your reporting, which I've already read from over the weekend as it relates to Cliff Kingsbury. But there was a game. It was a regular season game, even though it felt like anything but that. Just give me your arching reaction to a 24-17 season-ending win against the Eagles.
I'm sure you do this too. You know how maybe you're doing some work, but you want some noise, so you put on like a movie or a TV show you've watched 100 times before just to have something on. That's kind of how the game was for me, to be straight up. I mean, like, I was watching, of course, but like I was doing other things because, I don't know how much we were from the bigger picture context, knowing that the off season is here and there's going to be a lot of discussion. I don't know that it meant a ton to me, but look, obviously, it's cool to see Bobby Wagner, of course, get 2000 tackle, and Von Miller to move up the all-time sack list, and for Josh Johnson, a guy who's obviously had such a wacky career, to only get the second win as a starter. Those things were pretty cool. Beyond that, the Eagles are mostly playing backups, so it's kind of hard to know exactly what you're looking at. I did think kind of going into the game, it would be interesting because, the depth here is I think the injuries are the headline story, but the depth concerns to me were probably the bigger issue, because that ultimately, that's what the injuries exposed. So to see Washington, I won't say necessarily struggle, but it was a, 50-50 game against Philly's backups. I think was, even though Washington won, it was kind of an example of Super Bowl that this team needs more. And of course, I get it. Washington is missing a lot of people, third string quarterback, but Horn was out there, Payne was out there, et cetera. So they had their guys for the most part, and Philly was not.
Yeah, I'm not gonna rip into you for this take. I ripped into callers that had this take. Like, when you start a third string 39-year-old quarterback, 95 out of 100 times, probably 98 out of 100, it does not go well for you when you're down to your third string. And by the way, 3 out of your starting 5 offensive linemen are out. So the idea, to me anyway, that you should be embarrassed by barely beating Philadelphia's backups when you've started your own third string quarterback along with 3 of your starting offensive linemen are out. Not to mention guys like 79 and 66 and 93 running around on defense. It's not like Washington was at full speed either. So, I mean, we're really grasping for, but I couldn't believe the reaction of, this is an embarrassing win because they barely beat a team with backups. Like, did you see who we started at quarterback?
Yeah. For me, I'm purely talking, as you do every week, ask me, what do you think? I'm saying from an evaluation standpoint, I kind of couldn't do too much with it because there was such a, on both sides, like you're saying, there's not enough guys out there, but, from that Philly was doing what they were doing, it just made it that more challenging. And, I know from the, when you're around these people all the time, you get to know them as people. And so from the human element, of course, this has been a miserable year. They've been on this terrible run. I know they were all thrilled to get a win. Of course, the bigger picture perspective, I'm on the, hey, maybe at some point in the second half, you started to take out some guys to ensure that you don't win this game, because the draft pick.
Yeah, because Terry was drawing a penalty on every throw in his direction and several that weren't thrown in his direction. So maybe take him out of the game. Yeah.
Right. And again, I get it. He missed a lot of the season. He wants to play. They're all competitors. But this is why you get paid money to be running a football team. And I asked Dan Quinn this a couple weeks ago, but not about the draft pick, but about when are you going to start leaning in more to some younger guys beyond injuries? And he kind of said, we haven't discussed that. And I'm kind of like, how can you not have discussed that? That to me has to be the big deal, especially since Dan Quinn, you're presumably going to be here next year. This isn't just a hypothetical, let's focus out. This is for real. You were part of this going forward as well. Don't you want to see Jordan McGee, again, not about Bobby Wagner, but see Jordan McGee play more Benson, play more whatever. And then, so same thing here with the pick. I mean, and I know I've had some friends tell me, oh, calm down. The difference between 5 and 7 is not a big deal. It is a big deal. It is. Literally, we're talking about asset gathering. And, I mean, at the top, it's not a big deal if you go from 21 to 24. But 5 to 7, potentially is a big deal for all kinds of reasons. So, I would have seen the result flip. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, another one that's a head scratcher for me. I don't care that you want your team to win a game against the Philadelphia Eagles and you don't care about draft positioning, but to suggest that it doesn't matter is absurd. Of course it matters. Picking 5th is better than picking 7th. It's not a debatable situation. You have more leverage at 5 than you do at 7. It doesn't mean the results are guaranteed to be better because the draft is the ultimate crapshoot. It's the thing we know the least about, and by the way, teams know the least about heading into it when it comes to our knowledge and their knowledge of football. But of course, picking higher is better than picking lower. If you're in the position they were in, which is a totally and utterly meaningless regular season finale. But, you're not going to get the coaches and players to think that way. We understand that. But I was sitting there hoping that on 3rd and goal, Josh Johnson didn't, on that naked bootleg, waltz into the end zone. By the way, just real quickly, I do think, because we're going to move to the Cliff Kingsbury conversation, I think what you've seen just in the last 2 games is some really good offensive coordinating and calling with a third-string 39-year-old quarterback. He was good yesterday, for the most part. Josh Johnson. He was pretty good against the Cowboys, if truth be told. He wasn't their best player. I thought Terry McLaurin and Chris Rodriguez were good, but he was pretty solid. And 25 first downs, 6 of 11 on third, 3 for 4 in the red zone. Philly's backup defenders, and they were playing some starters, actually. Jordan Davis was out there. Jomo was out there. I actually looked at it and said, man, Andy Reid's not getting that out of his third-string quarterback. But anyway, we can move on from that. Tell me what you what you think.
By the way, just one. Well, if I could say one thing about this, obviously, like Philly right now is the team to beat in the NFC East, no question about that. And Howie Roseman, their GM, is viewed as, if not the best GM in the league, certainly one of the more creative and aggressive ones. And I think this scenario, what we're discussing in terms of the draft pick mattering or playing into it is important because we remember 2020, the Eagles, the last game of the year, Washington needs to win to make the playoffs. The Eagles have Jalen Hurts at that point he wasn't even the official starter yet. Right. At halftime, they're like, we don't want to win this game. Even though we've all spent this time we spent the last 6 weeks here saying that Jaden arguably should be playing if he's healthy to get the reps. Still, he said, you know what? Through the reps, the draft pick matters more. They lose the game. That puts himself in position to get Devontae Smith. If Washington, and so in the same case here, Washington doesn't do that. They essentially go for it and play to win, which again,
given that Josh Johnson was playing well, what would you have done? Put Driscoll in because Sam Hartman was inactive, right?
Right. Well, this goes to another point of why not look at Sam Hartman anyway? Because he's younger and all that.
I agree.
Stuff. So I do think when people say it doesn't matter, it does matter, and you can see some teams really understand that it matters, and they norms be damned. We're gonna tank in a game. It's very obvious. People don't like it. The heck with you. This is our franchise. What do we think is best? That's what they did, and obviously Washington went a different way.
I had to look it up because I wasn't exactly sure. Nate Sudfeld. They said, wait a minute,
yes,
we're within 3 and we're looking good here. And we got a chance to keep Washington from winning the division. To hell with that. Jalen, you're playing too well. We're putting Nate Sudfeld into the game. That was an openly, and I believe that was the final game for the head coach who won the Super Bowl. Him.
Yes.
Blanking on his name.
For sure.
Yeah. All right.
No.
So tell me what you know and what you think about the Cliff Kingsbury. I think Diana had that initial report, and then I read your reporting afterwards. Give us, an overview of the Cliff Kingsbury situation right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to peel back the curtain a little bit here, it's one of those things
Doug
where
Peterson,
the last,
by the way.
Oh, yes, of course. The last few weeks, I think it was probably sometime around after the Minnesota game where, there was questions about the play calling and so on. And I just started to think more about this offense and kind of where it's going. And look, obviously Cliff did a great job last year. He certainly, if he moves on to another team, whether as a head coach or whatever, that team will be in a good position with their coordinator. But there is, I think, a question of sort of like sustainability, right? It is such a unique system. And that started to make me think, if this is the way to go, what are the other 31 teams doing that they don't think this? I mean, every Cliff Kingsbury team blows away the other teams when it comes to no huddle and shotgun and things like that. And so, I started thinking, well, wait, what do these guys know that nobody else knows? And, and that led me down sort of the path of wondering what's going to happen here going forward. So the last couple of weeks, I started asking questions in the press conferences to Cliff and then to Quinn about the level of confidence with this. I wasn't just doing that for, S and giggles, right? So anyway, in terms of then moving, what is the deal? I think obviously we've talked all season about the defense and how the defense has to get fixed, and Dan Quinn took over play calling and what's that going to look like going forward. But I don't think anybody thought there was anything wrong with the offense other than maybe Cliff leaves. And I started to think about stuff and hear a little bit, and just kind of went from there. And I think at least it's a discussion, and I think that's probably a surprise to a lot of people. And like I said, this isn't just about the moment. This is about going forward. Like, let's just say that Cliff does leave, right? Let's just say he gets a head coaching job for one of these openings. Are they even going to run the same offense? He's basically a one of one in terms of this offense. There's nobody else really. You wouldn't automatically say that just because somebody here's on staff, that's what they would want to run.
It's not one of Ben. It's not one of one in terms of style. If you want to say the no huddle is one of one, but their pace of play is middle of the pack. Their pace. But
their no huddle, their shotgun by the numbers, and I've wrote this on my story.
The under center thing is by far and away this year, the league leader. That is true, but. The pace of play numbers are like middle of the pack. I mean, just because you go no huddle, it's really about when you snap the football. And they're right in the middle of the pack. There are teams that snap it at a faster rate than Washington. But anyway.
Right. But my point is that anybody else who would come in would not do it the same way because nobody else does it this way. And so if that's going to be the case, then where is this going? At some point, Cliff is going to go, whether he gets his own situation or whatever. So I did start to think, okay, maybe there needs to be a conversation about what do they think here internally. And I also, look, the run game, they by carries, they ran it a fair amount. When you strip away the quarterbacks, though, like the run game from the traditional players is, definitely towards the bottom of the league, and the inability to sort of stay with that, even though we all. I keep comparing it to like, I know I need to go on a diet, and maybe the first week or two I'm doing all the right things, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, I'm kind of hungry. McDonald's was there, let me go in there, and then all of a sudden I'm back on the bad stuff. And I'm not saying Cliff's stuff is bad, but it just felt like it feels like it's sometimes hard for him to stay with what maybe if not the building wants, what we talk about a lot in terms of the run game, and even especially in a year like this when you had so many injuries at receiver. And the run game was working, yet didn't quite lean into it. So I think these are the things that are being considered and discussed. It doesn't mean that they will make a change, but I think my sense is that it is possible they make a change, and that at a minimum it's being discussed as to where is this going forward.
Okay, so what about the disconnect between Peters and Kingsbury specifically? I had something on that earlier. I read your stuff, but I believe that some of that in terms of like there being a rift or a true disconnect or a real, personality confrontation kind of a thing. I was told that was a bit overblown, a bit hyperbolic. What are you hearing on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that I the notion of a rift on a personal level, I feel, is overblown, if not just flat out wrong. These guys have known each other going back to their time in New England when they were both young pups, trying to figure their way out in the league. And I don't think it's that, but I do, look, did Cliff during training camp say publicly, hey, we need to get Terry in here already? Yes, he did. He did do that. Did Adam Peters draft a tight end, H-back, and Ben Simmons that doesn't really seem to fit Cliff's offense? Yeah, I mean, that did happen. And, look, these things are not necessarily abnormal for here, but in a year when you're going 5-12, everything becomes more heightened, and I think it's more like that. I mean, and that's why I'd already sort of been working on this story, but felt the need to push it because the Diana's report got out there, and there was no context, and context matters, as you said. So yeah, I don't think there's any personal rift. That's my understanding. But sure, in terms of where is this going, yeah, I think there can be a disconnect there for sure.
Meaning that they could end up moving on from him, even if they think highly of him, but they think there could be a better solution.
Yeah, and I think also everything, of course, centers around Jaden Daniels, right? And he had one of the greatest rookie seasons of all time last year in this offense. So it's not like we have to go in the archives to find a moment in time when the Cliff Kingsbury system worked. But at the same time, what do we talk about? Jaden's got to stay healthy, all these things. And some of that's on him, of course, for sure. But, what system are you using? Does it put him necessarily maybe in more harm's way than others? I think that's something. Look, quarterbacks all around the league get hurt. That's just part of the deal. But I think in terms of the physical exposure, that may be part of it as well.
Yeah, I'm just looking because I had looked at this a few weeks ago, the pace of play stats. Washington 16th in the league, and some Shanahan-style offenses, including San Francisco, actually snap the ball at a faster rate than Washington does. But the amount of no huddle.
By the way,
yeah.
Well, and by the way, to that point, and this is something that somebody brought up to me that I looked up. The whole point of what they do is the no huddle means the defense has to sort of stay with a personnel group, and Washington can take advantage of opportunities there. The thing is, though, and I put this in the story, Washington is very middle of the pack in all of the formations, 11, 12, 13, 21.
Right.
That means they are substituting a lot in order to do that. Well, if you're substituting now, the defense gets to substitute. So it seems like you're taking away the primary advantage of what it is that you're trying to do in the first place. So yes, you're
well,
right.
I think they want the opportunity at that advantage, and then if they don't like what they have down distance personnel wise, they make those substitutions. But he just wants that presented at least as an option to begin with. I guess my point is, yes, they go no huddle, and that's unique, and yes, they're under center less than anybody else. But their pace of play, which ultimately is the more important number, is middle of the pack, and a lot of those under center teams are ahead of them in snapping the ball faster than Washington snaps it. I think in one of his answers maybe to you last week, he's like, we had to play a little bit differently. We had to slow things down this year because I think their pace of play last year was much higher on the list. Yeah, they're 16th this year. They were 8th last year in pace of play, meaning, how many seconds on average before they snap the ball from the end of the previous play. So they were 8th last year, and they're 16th this year. But yeah, I guess the one thing that I would just take a little bit of exception to is that his offense is one of one. There's nothing like it in the league. There are plenty of offenses that look like his offense once the ball is snapped. Kansas City's is one of those offenses that is similar to his once the ball is snapped. But pre-snap, the no huddle and the lack of under center is the outlier, piece of that, right? Or do you think it's more than that?
Yeah, no, but like I said, it's sort of like, we see in say college basketball, right? These various 40 minutes of hell, full court pressing all game, or these, Paul Westhead offenses where you just go nuts running up and down the court to score. That only works if you do it the whole time. It doesn't work if you do it sometimes. And I'm saying, so the point I think that others have made to me as well is if you're going to do this, why are you subbing so much? Like, pick a lane, do the thing, and then keep the defense stuck where you are. Now, again, I do think you're right. The fact that they had so many injuries this year probably wrecked some of those plans. I totally get it. But, these are parts of the discussion that needs to be had. And again, if, with the pre-snap stuff, why are they doing it at such an extreme to everybody else in the league? Are you getting an advantage of it? Does it actually help? Are you better off doing something more conventional? Obviously, Peters is with the Niners, with literally Kyle Shanahan, right? So, he saw that end of it as well. So, again, I don't get the sense that there's anybody going, oh, my God, this is a mess. We have to change this. I think it's more like, what do we do? What makes sense for us going forward? And I think that's at least where the conversation is.
Seems like Jaden, at least his mother, would prefer Cliff to be here based on her tweet yesterday.
Yeah, and we just talked to him a few minutes ago, and clearly he was said great things about Cliff. Loves the guy personally, professionally. They've clearly gotten along well, and again, last season did happen. Last season was incredible. So there's no argument, and from the perspective of a player, why would you want to do anything other than, or in this case, you said the mother of the player, why would you want to do anything else than stay with the player who you saw get your son or get yourself to incredible heights? Makes total sense. But that's not what that's up for somebody else to make those calls. So sure, I'm sure if they said, hey, Jaden, do you want Cliff to stay? I would venture to guess he says absolutely. But you listen, but that can't be the driving factor.
Yeah, I mean, I said this earlier in the show. We don't have to think about what Jaden looks like in Cliff's system. You can believe that, and I believe this. I think Jaden would be great in any system, and I prefer the Shanahan more under center style of offense, and I think he would thrive in it. But we have actual proof that him in Cliff's system works. We didn't get a chance to see that this year because he didn't play enough. But we know what it looked like in 20 games, and it was elite level offense of football last year. You just mentioned locker room cleanout day, and Jaden spoke. What else did you learn from the locker room cleanout so far?
Yeah, look, I think on some level we've been doing locker room cleanout for the last month. A lot of questions about where things gone wrong and how do you guys turn this around and all that stuff. And I think to the credit of Dan Quinn and the staff, at no point this year have I thought, boy, these guys are giving up. Right? I know that when they were losing games by 20 points, I think people were saying that, but that's just being sort of ignorant of what's going on. They didn't have the talent. They weren't very good, but they were trying. They were playing, and I know that's the bare minimum, but I do think that says something. We see some teams that don't do that. We've seen that here. So, I think collectively the players, said, hey, we believe that this thing can get turned around. It just, whether it's injuries or whatever, everything kind of just didn't go our way. So I don't think anybody, there was no hot take. Nobody was screaming. There won't be any sound bite that were, you can play it. Oh boy, there's real problems. None of that stuff. I think it's just, hey, they recognize this was not even close to being acceptable. And, everybody from the individual players to the staff has to figure out what to do. And like I said, it's somewhat of a generic view, but honestly, that was kind of the main thrust for a lot of these guys. Of course, there was some other fun, Bill Krosky-Merritt, the 7th round pick that nobody had heard of, comes in and has a really fun year. And he was talking with us about just, the joy that he has for being here. He always has a smile on his face. He's like, why wouldn't I? I'm in the NFL. And sometimes, in a season that's so miserable for everybody, you forget sometimes, hey, this person is having an unbelievable moment in his life. And, it was reflected in his play as well. So there's some of that, of course, on a day like this. It's the last day of school, except that your classmates aren't all going to be back next year. So there's always, bittersweet time.
All right. 2 more and I'll let you run. Number 1, back to Cliff for a moment. Percentage chance he's the offensive coordinator here next year.
You love doing this to me. I don't know, man. Again, it isn't just, like I said, I think sometimes teams don't make a move, as we're seeing a lot of coaches get fired, regardless of they just need to move on from this situation. They'll figure out the rest later. I don't think that's the case with here. In other words, if they're not confident of what they would do, right, to replace Cliff, then I don't know that like they're rushing it out. So, but that said, I do think there's some smoke to all this. So I'll go 60-40. He's not back, and maybe I'm just being a little bit chicken, and it should be a little bit higher. And look, he could get another job. I think right now, what is it, 6 openings as of a few minutes ago, I think. So, who knows? But one of those is Arizona, so I assume he's not going back there. But, he'll be high on list. Sorry, somebody's driving right behind me. He'll be high on list, so he could go on his own accord independent of what they do. But I don't know. I'll go 60-40. He's not back.
60-40, he's not back. Interesting. But I think what you said is important, and I would hope that unlike the last, 24 years before this new regime, that there'd be actual thought put into it, like we have a solution, which is why we're prepared and okay with moving on from him. Do you have any idea on the solution to No Cliff?
No. I mean, that's, again, look, I don't think they would lack for interested parties because Jaden Daniels is a special quarterback. So all kinds of people, this wouldn't be a case like we saw in the previous regimes of like, boy, who are you getting to take this job for a variety of reasons? I don't think that would be the case. But, again, look, obviously Peters has been around the league. Dan Quinn's been around the league. I'm sure they have thoughts about who they would want to bring in or not. On the defensive side, it's obviously a lot easier to point to guys like Raheem Morris or Al Harris because they've been with Quinn and so on. Here it would be a little bit different. But like I said, we'll see. And part of the reason why I go 60-40 is the point that Cliff could leave on his own, that he could get a head coaching job. This isn't just he's this or he's nothing. He could decide, I got options. Well, I'm good. Let's get back into it, right? I want to run my own shop again. So, that's part of the equation too. But no, I can't sit here and say definitively. I would venture to guess if they did move on that it would be to probably bring in like a Shanahan style offensive person, but who the individual is, I couldn't say.
I mean, is there any chance that person, David Blau, as an example, exists on staff?
David Blau has been a coach for 2 years. I find that hard to believe that they would make him. I mean, he's not even the official quarterback coach, right? He's essentially been doing that job since Tavita Pritchard left. But no, I can't imagine that would be the case. Plus, if Cliff were to leave, I can see David Blau going with Cliff and being a part of that. Like he could possibly hypothetically be the offensive coordinator for a Kingsbury offense, but Kingsbury's calling the plays. Like the way it kind of works with Andy Reid when Eric Bieniemy was there. But internally, look, I mean, Brian Johnson was an offensive coordinator with the Eagles, so that would be a name you could consider. Anthony Lynn, the running back coach, has done that as well. And look, Dan Quinn, continuity is a big thing. He knows these people. Yeah, sure, those would be a couple guys that would be sort of easy fits. Would the fan base love that? I don't know, but I don't think the team is worried about
keep in
that.
mind, our fan base wanted to run off Kyle Shanahan as an offensive coordinator, Sean McVay as an offensive coordinator, Kevin O'Connell. The list goes on and on. So hopefully they're not responding to our fan base when it comes to offensive coordinators. We don't have a great history of getting it right. All right, I had another question to ask, but you got to run. I was just going to, if you've got it real quickly, what's the one thing more than anything other than anything else you want to hear from Adam Peters today?
What the hell happened? And candor with it. We haven't heard from Peters since training camp eve, and needless to say, the world has changed dramatically. And Peters is, as a lot of these executives are, is not an open book when it comes to these media sessions. And, maybe he goes down that route again. But I think for me, and I think probably for you and others, you got to give us something. You've got to lay on the couch for a minute and give us some thoughts as to where.
Well, there's an obvious answer to it. The problem is they hate doing that. They hate listing the most. I mean, that's the easiest question in the world to answer if he's going to be honest with you. We didn't have our players this year. We didn't have them.
And that's fair to a degree. I think, like I said before, like injuries are the headline, but I think the real story is that the injuries expose the minimal depth, and the older roster doesn't have upside. And so when things started to go sideways with the injuries, you didn't have anybody to fill in. I mean, all things considered, Marcus Mariota was more than fine as a backup quarterback. You know what I mean? Like that in and of itself, sure, he's not Jaden Daniels, but they didn't like all of a sudden go, well, we can't win because of this guy. But all the other pieces, you know, we've talked about it all year that they didn't have any kind of real backup for Noah Brown, forget what might happen. He was hurt in minicamp, right? He missed all of training camp, and they still didn't have a viable backup plan. And, you know, I think that really helps crater the season. Then, of course, you lose Terry, and that makes it even worse. But, I think injuries are, yes, that's a real thing that happened. That can't just be the answer. So, again, do I think he's going to give, open up like that? I doubt it, but I would hope that, when you have a year like this, it can't just be we're going to do better. We're going to, that we're going to figure out what to do. Yeah, we get that. Give us something. You can throw us a bone on. Give us something specific. Fall on your own sword, whatever. But give us something that shows you get where everybody is frustrated and angry, and that you realize, hey, we made a mistake here. And by the way, that's fine. Be honest. Honesty always works, right? I mean, assuming you're within bounds of normal behavior. Honesty is always the best medicine. If you say nothing, I just don't think that's going to fly.
Talk to you later. Appreciate it.
Always, man. See ya.
Ben Standig, everybody. We'll go around the NFL, just focusing on the games that mattered, including last night's thriller. That's next. Kevin Sheehan Show, the Team 980, theteam980.com. We're free and live on the Odyssey app, and I do want you to know that if you've got any issues with your HVAC system, like we did about 7 or 8 months ago, Foley Mechanical is the place to go. We called Foley Mechanical. Dan Foley, who owns 100% of the company, came out, dealt with my wife and I directly. He's impressive. His team is impressive. All of the people that handle the equipment, handle the work, they're professional, they're skilled, they're sharp. Dan has the whole thing buttoned up. He owns 100% of the company. It's not a franchise. It's not some big private equity firm. Foley Mechanical is a full-service heating, air conditioning, hot water, and boilers company. They're the go-to for older homes with radiator heat, a real specialty. They work across the entire DMV, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, and they proudly install Amana HVAC equipment. If your system needs help or you just want it done right, call Foley Mechanical. Tell Dan that I sent you.
Mayfield from the pocket, swings it across the middle, touchdown, Cade Otton. And Tampa Bay right down the field on first blood.
Yeah, Chris Fowler on the call. That was the first game of the weekend, the part of that doubleheader against on Saturday. The Bucs stayed alive with the win over Carolina. They ended up not making the playoffs because Atlanta beat New Orleans the next day. But man, that game was impacted by weather, heavy rain during the game, and the Bucs played the best game they've played in a while. They rushed the football with Bucky Irving. Baker Mayfield was pretty solid, although he threw another bad pick. He had a lot of those during the course of this season. I think he threw 12 picks on the year, had some fumbles to go with that as well. They had a field goal block that cost me my only smell test loss of the week, 6-1 on the week. Bryce Young, Carolina. I don't know, man. I know they beat the Rams in Charlotte the last time they played. They're getting another big number. They're in as an 8-9 team. I just want to say this. I've said it for 7-8 years running. I just don't think an 8-9 team should be hosting a playoff game against a team that finished 13-4. Or 12-5 in the case of the Rams. Qualify for the playoffs, yes. The divisions keep the importance of winning the division. You get an automatic berth into the postseason when you win your division. If you won your division with a 7-10 record, that's fine. But if you've got a sub 500 record, you should not be allowed to host a first-round playoff game. I would just seed based on record 1 through 7. I don't think anybody would have a problem with that, and it does not disrupt the integrity of the division system. You still get a playoff spot by winning your division. You just don't get to host a game against the team that won 4 more games than you did this year. Carolina hosting the first round of the playoffs on Saturday afternoon against the 12-5 Rams after a loss to the Buccaneers. Let's go to Saturday night Seattle-San Francisco game in Santa Clara.
2nd and goal. Down by 10. That ball was tipped, I think, and picked off.
I got to tell you what, man. The 49ers, with the way they had been rolling on offense, their win over the Bears, Colts, I mean, they were averaging 42 points a game, nearly 480 yards per game. To see Seattle's defense completely annihilate San Francisco. I know no Trent Williams, but Kittle was back. He was playing, and they had no Trent Williams for much of that game against the Bears in Week 17. I mean, it was total annihilation. The 49ers had 173 total yards. They had 3 points in the game. They were 2 for 9 on 3rd down. They had 9 first downs total. Brock Purdy threw for 127 on 19 completions. His average yardage per completion was 4.7 yards. He was sacked. He was picked off. They couldn't run the football. There was Christian McCaffrey, 8 carries, 23 yards, 2.9 yards per carry. Meantime, Sam Darnold a couple times looked like he was going to blow it, but he hit some big plays. They ran the football. Remember when Seattle came in here, Max, and I'm like, I don't get it that they're not a good running football team. They have a decent O-line, and they can throw the hell out of the football, and Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet are good backs. Well, they rushed for a combined 171 yards, the two of them, 5.5 yards per carry. 13-3. It felt like more of like a 30-3 game. It was a one-sided pummeling. The 49ers stink on defense. Seattle missed field goals, plural. They went for a 4th down after taking a penalty on a 1st and goal at the 1. They should have scored 25, 26, 27, 30 points. That was domination and scary for the other NFC teams, knowing that Seattle gets to play twice at home with that defense. Really, really impressive. The 49ers, look, winning as many games as they did this year with the injuries they had is a minor miracle and a major aberration. But again, we talked about this. A lot of the teams they beat during the course of the year were not very good teams. And the best team they played all year was Seattle, and they weren't close. They get Philadelphia in the 4:25 window on Sunday at the Link. Let's go to yesterday, and the biggest game in the 1 o'clock window was between two teams who were the third and fourth place teams in the NFC South, but they would determine the champion, the Falcons and the Saints.
Tyler Shough, and it's intercepted. The Falcons take away D. Alford on his way. Eventually slowed down by Austin Estime.
So we've talked a lot about these two teams over the last month and a half. New Orleans is an outstanding defensive team right now. Outstanding defensive team with Braden Staley coordinating it. And you know who had a really good second half of the season? Chase Young. He finished with a sack and a half, 10 sacks for the season, 2 quarterback hits, multiple TFLs in the game. Chase Young turned into a bit of a monster as a pass rusher alongside guys like Granderson and Demario Davis and Cam Jordan, etc. The Saints had a chance. Atlanta's defense was very good towards the end of this year. They couldn't run the football at all against New Orleans. Kirk was solid, did have a crazy screen pass picked off, but Atlanta was really, at the end of the season, the team playing best in the NFC South. Had they won one more game, they would have been much more of a threat in the postseason than Carolina was. But with that win, the Bucs were eliminated. The Panthers were in. Let's go to the two games involving the two frontrunners for the MVP. First, Los Angeles and Rams-Cardinals.
Play action, Stafford complete. Parkinson inside the 5, dives for the end zone, touchdown.
So the Rams won this game 37-20, 4 more touchdown passes for Matthew Stafford. It's going to be really close with Drake May. I don't think there's any doubt about it, but 46 touchdowns on the season. By the way, the Rams won the game 37-20, and it was a close game going into the fourth quarter. Jacoby Brissett was really good, but ultimately Matt Stafford, 46 touchdowns, 8 picks, 4,707 yards against a much more difficult slate than the one the Patriots faced. The Patriots, by the way, yesterday beat the Dolphins 38-10 to finish off their impressive regular season of 14-3. Drake May, 14 of 18 for 191 yards, 1 touchdown. He's been outstanding. 31-8 for him, 4,394 yards. I'd personally give it to Stafford, but May is the real deal. And I think the Patriots are the real deal, despite the fact that they beat one team with a winning record. That was their win over the Bills earlier in the season. What are the odds? I haven't seen them.
Ooh, I haven't looked at them either. I know.
All right, I haven't looked at them since yesterday. Let's finish up with last night's thriller.
Around a young.
Oh.
Snap good. Hold it. The kick is no good. It is wide right. And the Steelers are the champions of the North.
I was so happy last night. I bet the Steelers to win the AFC North before the beginning of the season. But I talked all last year about how I didn't think Aaron Rodgers was done. If you had watched any of his games last year, he still threw it like Aaron Rodgers. It was just a dysfunctional situation in New York. And he's in a much more functional situation. And without his best receiver, they were a big underdog. They went off as a 4.5, 5-point dog in that game last night. And this was Aaron Rodgers more than any other reason. He was brilliant with throws that you just don't see many quarterbacks make. They won the game 26-24. Boswell missed an extra point, leaving the door open. Lamar Jackson, an incredible fourth quarter, threw for 238 yards, 3 touchdowns on just 11 completions. I don't think they gave the ball to Derrick Henry enough personally. But Tyler Loop had a shot to win it and send Baltimore onto the postseason, but he missed from 44 yards. Last thought on this game, because I talked a little bit about it in the beginning. I think Harbaugh blew it at the end. I don't think you rely on your rookie kicker from 44 yards in that stadium on that field, one of the worst to kick in the NFL. They had another timeout and plenty of time to run another play to get it a lot closer to make it chip shot range. You could have just run Derrick Henry for another 3 or 4 yards, but they should have taken a shot at getting an even closer range. They didn't. They clocked it with 2 seconds, let the clock run down, and sent him out there for a 44-yarder that he missed. Baltimore's lack of a pass rush was critical last night for Aaron Rodgers because he doesn't have receivers that get any separation. So he needed that extra time. He was brilliant last night. So was Lamar Jackson, an absolute classic to finish up the season. Pittsburgh gets Houston at home on Monday night. We're done for the day. Do want you to know that Window Nation right now is offering a great deal this January. It's their buy 4, get 4 windows free sale and no interest, along with no money down and no payments for 2 full years. Replace your older windows with custom-built, high-quality windows from Window Nation. Window Nation measures 3 times to ensure that these windows fit. They get it right the first time, and part of their promise is that they'll install those windows in a day or less. It all starts with a free in-home estimate. Call them at 866-90-NATION or head to windownation.com. Back tomorrow with all that's said in the season-ending presser today with Dan Quinn and Adam Peters. Chris Russell's next.